Thank you for attending this webinar on the dream of the butterfly. We're going to be spending a really quick time together to go through what I think are some really important points. There's always the possibility of us coming back to this material at another point in time to zoom in on one or more of the issues or the topics that I'm about to raise. And given the fact that it's so that we've got a lot to cover, a lot of ground to cover, I'm going to go ahead and get started. And the way I'm going to start is by sharing with you my screen, and I need to do one adjustment here. This is Abraham Lincoln's birthday, and I thought it was really appropriate to begin with some of Abraham Lincoln's words as he's talking about the nature of his society and his world. He said these words when his society was coming apart at the seams during the beginning of the Civil War, and I think these words are very applicable to where we are right now. So Abraham Lincoln said, "The dogmas of the quiet past are inadequate to the stormy present. The occasion is piled high with difficulty, and we must rise with the occasion. As our case is new, so we must think anew and act anew. We must disenthrall ourselves," that's disenchant ourselves, break our illusion. Lincoln said, "Fellow citizens, we cannot escape history. We will be remembered in spite of ourselves. We, even we here, hold the power and bear the responsibility. We shall nobly save or meanly lose the last best hope of earth." And what he meant by that may still be relevant today, that America as this larger than life global entity can help the rest of the world move forward into a new way of thinking. Or, on the other hand, we can be the ones that help the whole world to go down the tubes. I would really like to have it so that we're thinking about this in terms of us being the hope of the world. We shall nobly save or meanly lose the last best hope of earth. So I want to share with you some of my thinking on this thing I'm calling the dream of the butterfly, and I'll explain to you what I mean by that. But I also want to explain, to share with you some of the thinking of the man that the world knows as the 14th Dalai Lama, but not his words in terms of his role as being the religious leader of the Tibetan Buddhists, but really his role as being a simple person just like us, thinking about how the world needs to change. So we're going to, and the more I've been looking at researching the Dalai Lama's, I should say Tenzin Gyatso's philosophy, the more I do that, the more I see how not just compatible, but parallel his philosophy is with the work of Commonwealth. Now, it's interesting because we start from such different points of view, such different lives. The more I started thinking about it, I started thinking, you can't get too much more different than the two of us, yet where we have wound up in our lives is in parallel tracks and maybe even identical tracks. So as I get into his writing and get into some of the things that I've been saying, I want you to start listening to how two very different human beings growing up literally and figuratively on the opposite sides of the planet could come to the same conclusions in terms of what our planet needs to move forward. What is the world's need? It's what I call the path of destiny. We are living in a world driven by exclusivity. And I see from a number of the names that are popping up in the among the people who are listening to this live, a number of you know what I mean by that, by exclusivity. The notion of we are separate from each other. And I can do anything I want to do to you and nothing comes back to me. That we live in a world of shadows. We live in a world that's driven by violence, driven by alienation, driven by greed and poverty, and driven by depression. These were the four shadows that we looked at when in the Shadow to Light program. And for those of you who did the Shadow to Light program, thank you. And for those of you who haven't, hopefully you'll have another chance. Of a world devoid of spirit, a world where even our spiritual leaders don't talk about spirit anymore. A world where we relied at one point in time for our religious leaders to be our moral compass, and we then find that they don't even have a moral compass. And so we're kind of adrift in a world where few of us even know what we talk about in terms of spirit, and few of us know how to activate that and how to move that into a new way of looking at the world, a new way of connecting with the world. And we are living in a world that's driven by our challenges. Now, some years ago, Dr. A.T. Ariyaratne and I worked on this list that has become the 12 global challenges. The thing we asked ourselves is what are the challenges that every human being on this planet is faced with? What are the challenges that we may not be faced with these challenges alike? They may not be equal for us, but everybody is faced with them. So the 12 global challenges look like this. And I think it's very important for us to recognize all 12, because many of us just want to focus on one. And right now, the big one, the one that the media talks about, the one that everybody focuses on, is the ecology. Ecology is really important. And the reason that's the reason it's one of the 12 global challenges. However, if we try to zoom in on the ecology and not look at the larger picture of where the ecology fits into the rest of human consciousness, then we're going to miss out on an awful lot. I do a 2-hour presentation on the 12 global challenges. We don't have 2 hours to talk just about that, and so at another point in time, we'll dust off the 12 global challenges webinar, and I will present that. On top of looking at the 12 global challenges, we have something else to look at. And this is what I call activism in the age of Trump. When people routinely talk bad about Trump, one of the reasons they do it is that he makes such an inviting target. I try to quell that, though. because, as I'm saying here, Trump is an instrument of our destiny. Now, what do I mean by that? Some years ago, I was working in Sri Lanka, and I was working on a very large peace meditation that we were conducting. And by large, I meant 500,000 people wearing white, sitting in one place for peace. It was very impressive. So one of the things I was doing at the meditation was I was going around asking people, how, why are you here? What drew you to attend the peace meditation? And I'm being trailed by two translators because I can't speak either of the languages. I can't speak Sinhalese, I can't speak Tamil, and they barely can understand my English. So we're walking around the grounds of the peace meditation, and I'm just stopping random people and asking them a question. And we stopped a woman who was walking out of one of the temples and asked her the question, and she misunderstood it, which is really good because the question she answered was much more important than the question that I asked. She thought I asked her, why was she coming out of the temple, not why she had come to the peace meditation. And she said, I just came out of the temple because I left blessings for all of the people who helped me to get here today. She said, I left blessings for my daughter who made my lunch for me. I left blessings. I lit a candle for my son-in-law who gave me the 60 rupees for the bus. And then she said, I lit a candle for my husband because he told me not to come. He said it was going to be dangerous, it was too far away, who's going to fix his dinner that night, etc. And she said, as he talked about it, she realized how important it was that she actually attend. So her husband, by telling her not to come, became an instrument in her getting to that rally. I think that Trump is the same thing for us in this society. I think when you start looking at who he is as a personality, and then start looking at what passes for policy or doctrine or whatever, you start seeing that he is pointing us in a direction that we should not go in. He's helping us to see clearly the direction that we should not go in. What we haven't seen is what direction we should be going in. Now, there's a whole lot of folks who just say, oh, we just do the opposite of Trump and everything will be fine. Well, I think we had the opposite of Donald Trump in office before. Barack Obama is as high on my list of someone I want to have a beer with as Trump is low on that list. And nothing changed. The things that are driving us, the 12 global challenges, the mess that appears on page 39 in Creating a World That Works for all of these fundamental issues, all of the things that have gotten bad get worse, and we need to take a direction and look at it, at how we get past that. So Trump is helping define a whole new way that we're going to be interacting with each other, interacting with this society, interacting with our own spirit. And by doing so, I'm hoping that we start seeing how fundamental we need to change. There's a whole lot of people and a whole lot of media that say, oh, all you have to do is go into the voting booth and flick the lever for whoever is running against Trump. And that won't do it. If you do that, that means that you're not paying attention. Now, I'm going to vote in the presidential election because I vote in every election. It doesn't cost me anything. And I'm going to vote according to my values and my focus. And if I can't find anybody who's running that represents my values and focus, I'll write somebody in. But I walk in the door of the voting booth knowing for certain that that process is not going to change it. Now, what's going to change it? Something else. And it's going to take an awful lot of us rolling our sleeves up and getting some work done and asking ourselves some very, very difficult questions, and to have a context to ask those questions. And I'll be talking about that about 50 minutes from now. Okay. So Trump thinking, the way that he thought that he is articulating himself, he represents a significant part of America, of the American public. He represents our unconscious greeds and fears and sticks them out there for all of us to see and say, for a lot of us saying, oh yeah, I'm okay with that. I'm okay with well, all of the things that he has represented. And for those of us who believe something else, that we have to be the ones to elevate the conversation past what the political parties want us to talk about and what the media wants us to talk about, so that we can talk about what we should be talking about. And what is that? Let's talk about the 7 liberations of humanity. There may be 20 liberations. There may be only 3. These are the 7 that I've thought of. You are more than welcome to criticize it, to suggest 7 different ones, to say, oh, you left out X or Y or Z. But let's go through these and relatively quickly. I need to do a quick time check here. Okay. And I mean, really okay. So the first of our liberations is the liberation of our consciousness. I've been saying this over and over again. For those of you who have been with me for a while, I know you think it's just a cracked record, but it's all about consciousness. How we choose to act in the world, how we think about ourselves and our reality, etc. We need to be liberated from our delusions. Now, Donald Trump represents a coherent set of delusions, okay? And you can if you focus on those delusions, then America's the greatest thing in the world, and we have to protect ourselves from everybody else, so we need to put walls up so that we do that. We need to be liberated from that kind of thinking. Similarly, we need to be liberated from all the kinds of thinking that got us in the position that we're in today. We need to transcend it, and this is our opportunity to do so. We need liberation from our own addictions. In a really weird way, we've created a society where people become multi-billionaires by coddling to addictions. We don't even like calling them addictions. And what we have to do is start recognizing what our consciousness looks like once we let go of the things that are addictive for us. And your addictive substance may be very, very different from mine or someone else's, but we all have them. And rather than pander to them, rather than cater to them, what we should be recognizing is the liberation of our consciousness from them. Okay. Number 2 is the liberation of our own culture and our behavior. Right now, the main driving force of American culture is corporations. When they create kind of the next magic device, when they create the next movie or manufacture the next disagreement between people in the media, we're being driven by an artificial culture rather than being um, being true human beings and connecting with other human beings. So we need to be liberated from our own limitations, the limitations placed on us by behavior that doesn't work, doesn't answer our needs. I was thinking earlier today that people have a deep need for friendship and belonging. And the way that we've responded to that need is Facebook. I can push a button, and someone I completely have no idea who they are and not even sure I've ever met them, they can be my friend. And when I do that, there's something inside of me that doesn't get fed. There's something inside of me that's missing. And the more of that gets missing, the closer I get to despair, depression, suicide. Now, that comes from the fact that our culture is limiting in that way, in that I'm not making true human connection. I can come with 50 other examples of how our culture does that limitation. Something Mahatma Gandhi said. He said, a nation's culture resides in the hearts and the soul of its people. Something I'm saying, America's culture resides in the spreadsheets of its corporations. I think that's a really bad idea. I think that that's something that we need to change. Number 3 on the 7 liberations of humanity is the liberation of our identity. This is a really big one. For those of you who have done work with me and where I've talked about deep identity, deep conflict, etc., you know how deep this issue can go. And unfortunately, because of our time, I'm not going to be talking about deep identity tonight. Our identity is knowing who I am, knowing where I belong, knowing who you are and knowing where you belong, and having a sense of that knowing. Releasing ourselves from, but at the same time embracing our past. How many of us have let go of our past to the point that we don't have connection with those who should be instrumental in us recognizing our past? The crisis of identity, and excuse me for 1 second, I have to get my other notes here together. The crisis of identity is prevalent in our society, where identity politics, identity culture, we start atomizing ourselves. So rather than being the person that Rumi would call the true human being, which is the definition that most of the indigenous native peoples in the world, their name for themselves means the true human beings. Instead of identifying myself as a true human being, I start identifying with subsets of my being. So I'm only going to identify with being African American, or I'm only going to identify with being male, or I'm only going to identify with being an African American male. Okay, I'm only going to identify with being a former East Coaster, or now a present West Coaster, or however however many different ways I can do that identity. Now, don't get me wrong, my identity is really important. I am African American, I am male, I am a West Coaster now, I am all of these things. But I'm so much more than that. And my more starts overlapping with your more. And that's when we all become one. Now, until that overlapping happens, we start creating identity politics, which moves us further away from each other as opposed to bringing us closer together. And we start having an identity that's limited by, my skin, limited by my genitalia, limited by my life experiences, and not seeing how we all can connect with each other and how we all connect with the whole. Okay, so here's a friend of mine, Langdon. We're in Bali. I've known him over the course of several years and several trips to Bali. And at one time, he invited me to his house, first invited me to his temple where we did a temple ceremony. And for those of you who have been to Bali and have been invited by a Balinese resident to their village ceremony, it's really a treat. It's really an honor to be there. And we got dressed for the occasion. So I had to put on the Balinese sarong, which is very different from the Sri Lankan sarong. And I had my hat on and I had my flower, and I forget which ear the flower had to go in, but I had my flower, and I looked the part. I looked like I belonged. And we were there watching his son do a performance. The performance was a dance that had been part of his village, of his culture, of his society for 1,000 years or so. Okay. And so afterwards, he suggested that I come to his house, to his compound, and we sat out in this amazingly beautiful warm rain, and it's this outdoor pavilion, and it's open on all sides. And we were sitting there, and his wife came out and brought us some fruit and some cakes, and we were just talking. We were talking about about his life, like what does that mean? So his son came. His son was, I think, like 12, 14 years old, and he was sitting back to back with his son, and his son was playing with his long braid that hangs that's behind his back. And Langdon said, I have to do the gestures. He says so pointing to his son, at some point in time is going to be the head of this compound. And he's going to be living over there. And he points to the house where his wife came out of. Says, my wife and I will be moving over there. And he points to a house across the compound where two older people, his mother and father, were living. And when he pointed to them, they waved. Now, they don't understand a word of English, but they just knew that they were being talked about, so they waved, and I waved back. He says, now, when my wife and I move over there, my mother and father will move back there into the cemetery. And then my son will be moving over there, and he'll find a wife, and then they'll have children, and eventually he'll move over here. And he says, we've been doing that for 1,000 years. Now, the magnitude of that moment of not just looking at Langdon, but looking at his son, knowing he has a place in the world. Now, I asked, does the son have to do that? He says, no, if he wants to, he can go get an apartment in town. He can leave the country, he can do whatever he wants to. But that's his house. Okay, so he knows he has a place where he belongs, and he knows he has a tradition that he can belong to. I think this is really an important matter. I think it's really important that we do have a place that we can belong, and that this place is part of our identity. Okay. Next is the liberation of our wisdom. Now, wisdom is very different from intelligence. We can be very intelligent about things, and we measure our intelligence with intelligence tests, and that becomes the most important way of us thinking about ourselves and our society. It's only half of the game, though. The other half is wisdom. If intelligence is knowing about things, wisdom is knowing about relationships. And that's something that we in this society lack. Many of us don't know even what relationships mean. We know what we want from a relationship, but we don't know what our responsibility is to give to that relationship. We know that there is the things that for centuries, for millennia, would travel from parent to child, from mother to daughter, from father to son, Well, I don't know about you, but I didn't get that. That line broke probably in the generation before me. And for many people now, and you can see these folks in the world, they don't know how to raise a child because they've never seen one raised. They don't know how to, they have someone's idea on how to relate to someone without having the groundedness of being in a family, being in a community, being with a village of people that you rely and depend on, etc. So to stop the over focus on intelligence, on being smart about things, and start focusing on being smart about relationships, I think is something that we need to explore. The liberation of our nobility, and when this came to me, I had to go back and think about like, what does this actually mean? Something came to me. Well, this is something that happened when I was 15 or 16 or so, and in Camden, New Jersey, and this is in the early days of the Black Power movement, and we were feeling like, oh my God, there's all this stuff to know. So I organized a busload of people from Camden we went up to Newark, where Stokely Carmichael was delivering a major address. And we were all wound up sitting up in the balcony, and if you've never heard Stokely Carmichael speak, you should do a YouTube search on him. He's a very dynamic speaker, very powerful speaker. And he was saying all the things that we were expecting him to say. We were doing all the applauding that was expected in those things. And at one point, he said, "We are fighting for our humanity." And everybody's, yeah. And then a quieter voice, he said, "We are fighting for our nobility." And a bunch of us were like, what's that mean? You know, what we thought of as nobility were like kings and queens and folks bowing and curtsying and wearing crowns and stuff like that. And I've been working with that notion of our nobility for a number of decades since then, of recognizing it has nothing to do with crowns and royalty, etc. What it has to do with how close you come to being that true human being, to being a human being that is freed from their own limitations, that you're being the best possible example of humanity at this point in time. Since I've started studying the Dalai Lama, Tenzin Gyatso, I I've come to recognize how noble he is in his very simple robe, in his very simple haircut, in his very simple message. But that all of that says, it speaks of a nobility of person. We each need to become that. But the way we become that is by not dwelling on me, but start exercising the values of compassion and tolerance and forgiveness and the other things that will actually change our society. Okay, I have to speak a little faster. So we need to be liberated from our creations. We need to be liberated from our corporations, from the television, from the internet. We need to be these things right now run our lives, okay? Our lives, our corporations, the life of a corporation is run by its spreadsheet. What makes more money is a good thing, regardless of the impact it has on human beings, on the earth itself, etc. What makes less money is a bad thing, regardless of whether it's doing something positive for human beings, the earth itself, etc. And that is a recipe for disaster. At some point in time, we're going to have to do things differently, and the first level of doing something differently has to take place in our coming together as plain human beings and talking about what's important to us and staying away from things that are amazingly divisive but are not important. Okay. And then the last liberation is liberation of the earth. Liberation of from the way that we treat the earth. The other way of saying that is honoring our mother. We treat our mother like a slave. And with a slave, you can do anything you want to do and nothing comes back to you because the slave has absolutely no rights. There's no expectation. I mean, we treat the earth like an ATM machine. I'm going to sit there and just keep withdrawing until there's nothing to withdraw. Now, all indigenous people know that that's a mistake, but in this society, we pay no attention to indigenous people, and so therefore we're not going to see the mistake until we either open our eyes or until it's too late. I'm betting on we're smart enough to figure this out as relatively early. Okay, excuse me again. I'm going to look back at my notes for a second. Okay, so all of this is pointing us in a direction. And the direction it's pointing us is what I call the dream of the butterfly. A new level of humanity in the 21st century. What we're creating is a world that works for all people, for all beings, and looking at the world as one. Now, for those of you who have been with me over the course of the years and the decades, know I've been saying this until I sound like a broken record. A few of us are doing this. Most of us are paying attention as long as the video is running. And then when that stops, we start paying attention to the BBC or Associated Press or Al Jazeera or any of the other news outlets that give us a different picture of what's going on. All of that all of our political apparatus, all of our economic apparatus, all of our social, cultural, media apparatus is focused in one direction. And that direction is the direction of the caterpillar. That direction is the direction of the being, or the process by which we're eating the entire earth. Caterpillars are eating machines. They just keep going and going until a divine imperative hits them. And by divine imperative, I just mean an imperative that comes from outside of themselves. Caterpillars are, when they're in your garden and they're eating everything, they're having a ball. There's no reason to stop, except there's a big reason to stop. It's time for them to become something else. So the something else has to be bigger than I'm a Democrat, or bigger than I'm a capitalist, or I'm a socialist, or I'm a communist. All those are modifications of the of the caterpillar. What we have to do is do something that has never, ever existed on the planet before. It's ours to do. This is our challenge. It's not my grandfather's challenge. He's passed away. It's not my great-grandchildren's challenge. They're going to be the inheriting what we do. This is our time, and it's time for us to act like this. It's time for us to have a revolution. Now, as soon as I use the word revolution, for those of us who were raised in the American educational system, we believe that revolutions are violent. Revolutions are an overthrow, meaning the people that you're replacing don't want to go, and so they're clinging to power. They're shooting back at you, and we storm the castle and take the radio station, and it's like that's all one way of looking at a revolution. There's a completely different way of looking at the revolution. I'm saying it. Tenzin Gyatso is saying it. Martin Luther King is saying it. Nelson Mandela is saying it. All of us are saying this. And it's up to you to hear this differently. If you want to cling to the old ways of looking at things, you simply won't see this, and that's okay. You'll just say, "Oh yeah, Shariff is this, lovable quack that talks all this weird stuff that never is going to come about, and I'm going to go do something else now." Or together, we can actually create a process that becomes an inevitable process in how we live on our planet. So without further ado, and I'm doing relatively, let me do one more time check here. I think I'm doing really well with regard to time. Maybe actually right on time. Goodness. Fancy that. I don't think that's ever happened before. So I don't know how to act. So let's go into this spiritual revolution of consciousness. Now, I'm going to be weaving together a lot of different concepts. Some of these concepts come from me. Some of these concepts come from Martin Luther King. Some of these concepts come from Tenzin Gyatso. And hopefully you can see how they weave together. If you have any question about how they weave together, we'll get to that in the Q&A portion. Okay, here we go. Martin Luther King said, "If we are to go forward, we must go back and rediscover those precious values, that all reality hinges on moral foundations, and that all reality has spiritual control." Now, these are really important words. King may be the most eloquent, articulate person of the speaker of the 21st century, of 20th century. He didn't use words accidentally. We could spend a lot of time talking about what does he mean by moral foundations. All we know now is that that's what we have now is not it. And when he says all reality has spiritual control, he did not say all of reality is controlled by God, okay? Whether you believe in a God or not, whether you believe as a Christian, a Buddhist, a Muslim, or whatever, all reality has a control that is transcendent, that transcends our meat bodies here, our 3D reality. Now, King is saying that, all of our leaders are saying that, and all of the classical and quantum physicists are saying that, okay? I mean, that there's something else out there. Max Planck, one of the fathers, the deans of physics, talked about there being a universal mind, okay? That is the substrate for everything that could possibly exist. Again, I have another talk where I go into this for about a couple of hours, and I would love to give that at some point in time. But this is just a really, really important point. The Dalai Lama says, when I speak about spiritual revolution, I regard myself not as a Buddhist, not as the Dalai Lama, not as a Tibetan, but rather as one human being. Spirituality I take to be concerned with those qualities of the human spirit, such as love and compassion, patience, tolerance, forgiveness, contentment, a sense of responsibility, a sense of harmony, which bring happiness to both self and others. I want to stress this a little more. Follow these values that he's talking about. Love, compassion, patience, tolerance, forgiveness, contentment, having a sense of your own responsibility, having a sense of your own harmony, that these things will bring happiness to others if you practice them, but they'll bring happiness to yourself if you practice them also. That this, for him and for me, is the core essence of a spiritual revolution. He goes on to say, thus spiritual practice involves, on the one hand, acting out of concern for others' well-being. On the other, it entails transforming ourselves so that we become more readily disposed to do so. To speak of spiritual practice in any terms other than these is meaningless. And by the way, when you see emphasis in the words, I'm putting that emphasis there. My call for a spiritual revolution is thus not a call for a religious revolution, nor is it a reference to a way of life that is somehow otherworldly. Rather, it is a call for a radical reorientation away from our habitual preoccupation with self. A radical reorientation away from our habitual preoccupation with self. Now, I have seen people quote that statement while being habitually preoccupied with themselves. So we need a radical way of reorienting ourselves. And what I'm going to be presenting at the bottom of our time here is a way for us to get to this reorientation. So I've talked about, and in Creating a World That Works for All, I've written about the hunger for the sacred. That the hunger for the sacred is something that's good. There's a yearning inside of me, and there's a yearning inside of you for something that is larger than this body, than this mind, than this experience on this planet. That's what I call the hunger for the sacred. Now, if you take that and you add to it not knowing how to be fed, you take that and you add to it this quest that I have to get more money, more cars, more houses, etc., because there's something empty inside of me, and I think that the houses, the cars, and the money is going to fill it up. Guess what? It doesn't do that. Sorry if I busted anybody's bubble here. Not knowing how to be fed means I feed my addictions rather than feed my true self. I feed my delusions rather than feeding my true self. So the hunger for the sacred and not knowing how to be fed leads to a condition that I call spiritual starvation. That is what you see happening most of the time in our society. That is the behavior that you see from the current resident of the White House. That is the behavior that you see when you start looking at the number of people who are amazingly intelligent, very well learned, etc., and have no idea how to have relationships with other people and are winding up losing their jobs, etc., because of their completely jammed up way of looking at the other. Now, this could be sexual, this could be in terms of economics, I'm better than you. It can be racial in terms of someone's skin color. Go through the news right now and see the number of people who are in the news because there's something lacking inside of them and they don't know what to do. So our challenge becomes learning how to feed our hunger for the sacred. Now, I'm talking about it. Tenzin Gyatso's talking about it. Martin Luther King is talking about it. All of you hopefully are going to be buzzing about it. So let's look at how we all can learn how to feed our hunger for the sacred, and to also learn that we're not doing it right now, or we're doing it partially right now. Okay. Back to the Dalai Lama. A revolution is called for, certainly, but not a political, an economic, or even a technical revolution. We have had enough experience of these during the past century to know that a purely external approach will not suffice. What I propose is a spiritual revolution. My work, I'm going to stop saying he said, me said, because you see the picture. My work is my spiritual path, a spiritual calling dressed in the language of the practical. I don't wear special robes, speak in foreign tongues, or have a solemn expression. My focus is inclusivity, teaching the theory, philosophy, and practice of the inextricable linkage between our individual lives and the other, whoever your other may be. The great movements of the last 100 years or more, democracy, liberalism, socialism, have all failed to deliver the universal benefits they were supposed to provide, despite many wonderful ideas. The time has come to try a different approach. Of course, it is very difficult to achieve such a worldwide movement for peace of mind, but it's the only alternative. Our actual enemy, you see, is within ourselves. The afflicted emotions, pride, anger, jealousy, are our real enemies. Our enemies are the things that prevent me from being compassionate. That's my own enemy. It's not an external one. My enemy is the thing that keeps me from being forgiving. That's an enemy inside of myself. It's not an enemy that's outside. When we focus on external enemies, what we wind up doing is digging the hole deeper for ourselves, and at the same time, digging the hole deeper for them. So what I have to do to change our entire society is to work on changing me. Not nearly as much fun as pointing the finger at somebody else and saying it's all your fault. Being a mender, an activist for an inclusive society, is a spiritual discipline. We practice a different kind of spirituality, the spirituality of turbulent times. Success means awakening in myself a spirit that can help make a better life for others. Success means I have acted in the world as though I were a part of it, not apart from it. Success means becoming conscious of and faithful to my values and to my soul. This is what I believe the Dalai Lama is talking about. That I can go to a soup kitchen and I can dish out soup to those dirty, nasty, ugly people down there. And when I'm doing that, I'm not practicing compassion. It's my eyes. I've got these invisible glasses on, and my eyes are prevented from seeing that that person on the other side of the soup counter is me. All they are is me. A few changes in life circumstances, and that's me. So therefore, when I'm being compassionate to them, I'm being compassionate to myself. When I'm being compassionate to myself, then I'm being compassionate to them. And this becomes a reciprocal relationship. This then is my true religion, my simple faith. And I think that I can say that this is not just his true religion. This is my true religion. This is my faith. I would like to think that this is our faith. He goes on to say, in this sense, there is no need for temple or church, for mosque or synagogue, no need for complicated philosophy, doctrine, or dogma. Our own heart, our own mind is the temple. The doctrine is compassion, love for others, and respect for their rights and dignity, no matter who or what they are. Now, when we get this, when I get this on a personal level, when I get this on a societal level, when the President of the United States gets this, when they start from this premise, we're going to wind up in a completely different reality, a different way of looking at our society. And we're going to see that all of our problems are really, really easy compared to how not only difficult, how impossible they become when we're thinking about this from the point of view of exclusivity. From the point of view is I'm separate from you. Okay, so what I want to share with you right now is what I've been calling the Butterfly Project, the dream of the butterfly. We know where we are right now as a society. We're in the 12 global challenges. We're in the 4 shadows. We're in this. We've got our backs against the wall. What are the first steps we need to take that's actually going to get us to a global transformation? This is what I'm proposing. This is what I'm working toward right now. This is what I will be beginning to raise money for right now. This is something that all of us that are here now, and all of us who are going to be watching this video, can start the process of moving toward. The caterpillar to butterfly metaphor, I think, is the right metaphor for our times. We are, I think that that we need to choose the right metaphor in order for us to move forward. And if we choose the wrong one, okay, and there have been a number of I think, wrong attempts at wrong metaphors. we wind up not having the energy. There's not a forward movement of energy. I'm thinking there's been several attempts at having as a metaphor the people are talking about not Wall Street but Main Street. Okay, people are like, let's get back to our kind of our rugged individualism. Let's get back to, and everybody own their own mom and pop shop, etc. And very quickly, some people realize, well, that wasn't a really great time for lots of people in our society, most especially African Americans and other people of color, and most especially women. You know, it was a great time back when you couldn't vote, and a great time when Main Street was there, but you couldn't shop on there because there were restricted laws because of that. So choosing the right metaphor is really important. The recognition that inside of the caterpillar, as it's walking around, there are these seeds of butterfly. There are these cells that are called imaginal cells that will then grow once the caterpillar turns into the chrysalis. In all of that ooze, the butterfly will start to grow from the caterpillar. The time to start growing those cells on a societal level is right now. Okay, now, and so what do the cells look like? These are the seeds of a new society that's growing. Think about the places where society has gone through a fundamental change. For us, it was in the 1770s. We had a really bad king. And what most people wanted was a better king. What our founder said was, we can take that deeper. We can go further. Why do we need a king? We're smart enough. So we're in the seeds of a new society. And in that new society, we see how many changes need to take place. And some of us are counting on space aliens coming down and saving us from ourselves. I don't think that we need that. I think that we are smart enough to think out this next level of humanity. AI won't do it. Artificial intelligence won't do it. Those who are waiting for either space aliens or the second coming of Jesus or anybody, anything else, any of those kinds of things are acting outside of themselves. I think that one of the most important things that we need to do is we need to gather, we need to discuss, and we need to network. And we need to not rely on digital devices to make that happen. There is something that happens. There's a way that I get fed when I am face to face with each one of you. There's something that needs to come out of me, and it's brought out when we are when we are in direct contact with each other. That's not to say we shouldn't use digital devices. Guess what we're doing? We're using digital devices right now, and that's fine. But when we rely on them too much, when we lean on them too much, when we think that we're getting something from them that we're not really getting, that becomes really dangerous. We need to commit, to pledge ourselves, to pledge our time and energy to making this happening. Most people that I've been working with have treated all this like dabbling. Like, oh yeah, I'll kind of hang out and I'll do this kind of work. I'll do some of the exercises, etc. And then I'm going to go to the more important stuff, which is getting rid of Trump or getting the carbon out of our atmosphere, etc. And again, I'm not saying these things are not important, but they have to be important in context. If you don't know why you're getting rid of Trump, if you don't know why you're removing the carbon from the atmosphere, it won't work. And even if it does work, it won't solve the problem. Then after we are committed to a process, we need to start doing some modeling. What does the next society look like? What does it act like? How does it function? We need to start asking ourselves those questions, because once we have a real world something that we're dealing with, we're going to start seeing where my real values are. And then we're going to start seeing where all of our real values are. Okay. One of the things that we need to model is another way of doing governance. And I use this example a lot. I mean, this is wisdom I learned in a refugee camp. Okay. So I spent a lot of time when I was in Sri Lanka working in visiting and touring refugee camps. It's really, if you've never been to a refugee camp, you've never encountered concentrated misery, concentrated despair at that level. So I'm touring the camp and I'm talking with people in a really paradoxical way. Just me being there and just talking to them would give them a sense of hope. A sense that, oh, we're not forgotten about. Here's this guy from the other side of the planet who's coming and talking with us. And I had some stock questions I would ask, and I had my translators who were, again, translating for me. And this was a Tamil refugee camp, and so everybody's speaking in Tamil. And again, one of my stock questions is, what's the solution to the mess that we're in right now? And said in a culturally appropriate way. And this one guy, so some of the refugee camps were there for so long. People had set up little businesses inside the refugee camp. So this guy's business was fixing bicycles, okay? And so I was talking to Mr. Bicycle Repairman and asked him, like, what do we, need to do to make a change from this? He stopped and he thought for a second and said something, and my translator said, we need a new government. And I wrote down on my pad, need a new government. And I got back to the office and I typed up my notes and I showed them to, when I'm being translated, I always show them to someone else to see if that's really what was said. And they said, no, that's not what he said. He said, we need a new system of governance. Now, that's really, really important. I could go on for another 2 hours about how important that is. That we're not going to be saved by any individual, no matter how good they are. We're not going to be brought down by any individual, because no matter how bad they are, because the problem is the system of governance that we've got right now. What we need is a new system of governance. We need to start it. We need to start practicing it. We need to see kind of like, how do we actually do these things? And my intention is to make that practice fun, to make it like, wow, let's see all the different things that we can do to learn how to connect with ourselves and learn how to create a whole new system. Similarly, we need to create shadow and alternative and parallel economic systems. We need to do our economy in different ways. And there's a lot of interest in doing this, but there's been no centralized focus saying, let's experiment with going this way. Let's experiment with going that way. Lots of theories, but not enough modeling. And so we want to do the theories part, we want to do the committing part, but we also want to do the modeling part. And also modeling new social structures. Facebook is a huge social structure. It is I believe it is a very damaging social structure, given at how ubiquitous it is, how widespread it is. If you put limits on it, you had it on for 8 hours a day. There's a cap on how many hours a week you could get on it. There's a cap on the kinds of things you can say. There's a cap on how many videos of cute kittens you can look at. Then I would say I wouldn't have a problem with it. But being that we can start trying to feed this addiction in the bad way all day, 24/7, then I think that we need some new social structures. So our 3 steps. Step number 1 is creating something that we're calling the imaginal cafes. And this is a restarting of the Commons Cafe. Given the time, I don't have time to go into our experience with the Commons Cafe. Just let you know, it was a very successful process for getting people who were either actual or potential adversaries together. It was based on the World Cafe. So if you know about the World Cafe, Commons Cafe looked similar to it. And these were intermittent or interval cafes. We would do 4 or 5 of them in a particular area and stop. We would do the large cafes would take place over a long weekend. And we did several large cafes, large meaning 500 people, 700 people or so. We did, and I've never added it up, but I think that somewhere around 30 or 40 different cafe sites around the country. And then each one of them went from 4 weeks to 8 weeks, and some even went into 12 weeks or so. For lots of different reasons that I'll be glad to respond to if anybody has a question about it. I called a halt to them. And now I'm ready to end the halt and rev them back up again. So the first part is going back to these interval gatherings. Then to actually look at creating permanent cafes, create something that actually becomes an economic engine run by people who have worked through their issues of greed, run by people who have who have worked through their issues. I have to have more and more and more. The second step is the commons, and this is more than a cafe. Where do you get your groceries from in terms of people who understand and have your same point of view? Where do you get your shoes fixed? Where do you get, how do we live our lives and live those lives together? The third step is the Awakening Center. And for those of you who have read my book, The Chronicles of the Upheavals, yes, that's the Awakening Center I'm talking about. I'm talking about what would be a village, but a village that is operating with a completely different set of values and a completely different set of goals. Our goal is not make more money, but our goal is the awakening of humanity. Okay, this brings us to the end, and I'm having the notion of we are poised on this collective next step of humanity, that we all can get there together. This prayer, which I've used a lot in Common Way gatherings, and again, it's based on a Buddhist prayer, and it's a prayer that even atheists can make. It's not something that needs any level of dogma to it. And that is, may all beings be well, may all beings be secure, and may all beings be happy. Having said that, I am going to now stop sharing my screen. And now is the time that we can start the process of doing questions, comments, answers, etc. So what I need to do is I will, there's a button on this screen for everything. I am now going to, you're all still muted, but I'm going to allow you to unmute yourselves as you have a question. Now, there's one person, I don't know who it is, who's calling in on a telephone, and I will have to unmute you, but you're going to have to let me know that by sending me a chat, if you can see your chat window, saying, please unmute me. As for the rest of you, you now have the flexibility to unmute yourself, and I am expecting someone at some point in time. Questions and comments and thoughts, observations, etc. I may or may not be able to answer your question, and I'm setting a timer now. As I said, I will be on the line for a clear 30 minutes to give all of you the opportunity to ask questions. And I don't see anyone reaching for the unmute button. Maybe this means that you don't have the flexibility of unmuting yourself, or maybe it means that you're all shy. So I'm not seeing I see a message from Jim, and I don't see a microphone for you, Jim. Let's see if I can. I don't see a button to unmute you either. So let's see if I can see one up here. I guess we're not recognizing a microphone for you. So I can turn on your video, or I can, or you can type your message. So everyone else is still holding firm, and I guess that means that I can just keep talking. There's always that danger. Stop me before I talk again. Okay. So let me say something. Let's see if it's actually on this slide deck. I'm going to go back to sharing my screen since you're all being shy. I want to share something that if you've been in a presentation with me, you may have seen. And this is what I call 9 pixels. This picture is an actual photograph of the Cassini space probe that was sent to Jupiter and sent back these amazing pictures of, Saturn. These amazing pictures of Saturn. There are 2 things that are visible in this picture that are not visible from Earth. And I think that you can see my cursor when I do this. This outer ring here is not visible from Earth. It's only visible when the sun is backlighting backlighting Saturn. This is made up of water ice, and there's a moon, if you can see it right there inside this ring, and there are these volcanoes on the moon, and the volcanoes are spewing ice into into space and makes that ring there. The second thing, that to me is interesting to astronomy geeks. I confess a little geekdom there. But the second thing is much more interesting and much more important for our conversation. And that is this little tiny blue dot right there. That is a picture of the Earth from 1 billion miles away. So we're shooting toward the sun, through the rings of Saturn, and off on the side, there's our little tiny planet. Everything that we know is on those 9 pixels. Everything that we know about life, about love, about compassion, about our responsibility, not only for ourselves, not only for the people in our society, not only for the Earth, our responsibility for the entire solar system, our responsibility to the entire galaxy, all of that stems from those 9 pixels right there. Right now, the consciousness that trashed the Earth is trashing the moon and is trashing Mars. We send up our rockets, we drop them down, they run around for a while, they run out of gas, and we send something else up and let the other one just sit there rotting. That's the consciousness that says, I am more important than anything else that's out there, including the beauty and majesty of our planet and every other planet. Albert Einstein said that insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. What we need to do is end our insanity, okay, and end this. I'm going to stop sharing here. Is to end our insanity and to end this notion that we are more important than absolutely everything else in the world, okay? And so I'm seeing a message from Cassandra, and I am going to unmute you, and I am going to give you the option to start your video. Hello, are you there? Can you say something?
Hello. Yes, I'm here.
Well, there you go. Okay. Okay, and I'm going to go to gallery view so that we won't be jumping back and forth. Okay. So, hi.
Nice. Thank you so much for everything that you've shared. Really appreciate your knowledge and wisdom. You've inspired a lot of ideas as well as connected to a lot of things that I've been developing in my heart and soul and mind, vision in my head for a long time, called Sustainability Butterfly. And I envisioned it as a philosophy, a movement around driving change towards sustainable communities, as well as our own inner well-being, so our emotional, physical, and spiritual alignment. So it's just so fun to see the shared collective conscious gathering around this idea of a butterfly, and I resonate so much. And based on what you've shared, I'm curious, as this is one of my favorite questions to ask, is that what's the simplest actions that we can take now, particularly as individuals watching this video, that would have the greatest impact, reach the greatest number and diversity of people, but also be the simplest change, the most doable?
You have no idea how much I think about that question. It is an ultimate background question. Okay, there are lots of things that people want to do that's not going to solve a thing, but I just feel like doing this, okay? There are lots of things that people can do to have a major change, but oh, that's too hard, okay? Or it may mean that I may not look good while I'm doing it, you know. Or it may be that I run up against authorities in doing that. And when I'm thinking about that, I'm thinking about Martin Luther King and leading the demonstrations where he would get beaten and get jailed, get bit by the dogs, etc. I'm thinking about Tenzin Gyatso and having to leave his own country and never going back. Okay, this is really important stuff. Okay, having said that, and having done lots and lots of projects over the course of lots and lots of decades, actually, this three-step process that I was talking about, starting the imaginal cafes, you'll be able to, actually, where are you, by the way? Tell us where you are.
I am in Kirkland, Washington, so just outside of Seattle, the greater Seattle area.
Okay. You'll be able to do this in your area with 25, 30 people or so. Okay. You'll be able to start that process. And as we're starting that process with you, and we're starting that process with, 20 or 30 other locations around, and then start growing it, because people have this hunger for this face-to-face connection. They have a hunger for doing something that has legs to it, that's going to go further down the road. That this being the case, that you will be able to that it's not asking people to give up all of their wealth or give up all your time, etc. The way we did the Commons Cafe was one evening a week. The commitment was for 7 o'clock to 9 o'clock. Once we got started, nobody left. The people were so it was so feeding for people. I'm very serious. I would say 7 o'clock to 9 o'clock. At 10 o'clock, I'd get tired. I'd go out. I would do my shopping, come back through at 11 o'clock. The security guards had thrown everybody out of the building, and they're still standing, sometimes even in the rain, talking to each other. That's how hungry we are for that kind of connection. Okay. Now, let's add to that a way for us to combine our spirits at the same time. Now, again, I'm not talking about any religious practice, but something that we all can agree on. Can we agree on a 10-minute meditation? Can we agree to listen to the sound of a gamelan or listen to the sound of a gong? Can we agree on such and such and such and such? And again, so each group is experimenting with their group, but we're all experimenting together. This starts getting, to me, really interesting. Okay. So I see. So I hope that answered your question, and I'll have a deeper answer for you in the near future. We'll set up just a meeting to talk about the Imaginal Cafe and how to launch that. I see now that Chris Johnson wants to be unmuted, so I'm going to mute you, Cassandra. You just did. You muted yourself. Yay, thank you. And I'm going to unmute Chris. And you're jumping. Okay, there, you're right there. So, hi, and where are you, and what are we talking about?
We're in Redding, California, Northern California.
Okay.
And it's actually my wife, Diana, that asked the questions.
So. Okay.
So I'm looking at beginning a new spiritual community here.
Mm-hmm.
I am not as young as our previous speaker. I'm 55 years of age.
Mm-hmm.
and I am looking to make a difference in our community and in the world. And I'm wondering what just basic, simple words of wisdom that you have for someone setting out to make a difference in a community and in the world.
Let me do a couple of things. One of them is talk really slow while my brain is catching up with me. And you know, sometimes the train leaves the station without me.
Yeah, I understand.
So actually, I have to tell a story. Then I'm going to get to your question. So when Martin Luther King was doing the March on Washington, the first thing they did, this is what, 64, he and his lieutenants were going up to Capitol Hill to lobby the congressmen to pass the Civil Rights Act. And so he's up there and he's in Senator so-and-so's office, and he can look out the window and the march has started without him. They just got bored and they said, okay, let's start marching. So he runs out of the Capitol building and runs down the street to jump into the front of the march that he's supposed to be leading. So yeah, sometimes the train does leave without you. There are a couple of things that I would suggest to you. And the first thing I would suggest is, and I'm very reluctant to do it, is to get a copy of my book, Creating a World That Works for All. It's the manual. Say again?
We've already read it.
Oh, cool. I'm done. I'm done. Okay. So let's say just one other thing. Okay. So everything, assume I just said everything that's in the book. I would really, really urge you, one of the biggest dangers of spiritual communities is insisting that everyone actually believes as you believe and practices as you practice. Right. There may be a place for that, okay, in your process, but your larger process has to be inclusive. And what inclusive means is that you've got practices that people can interact with you without, making whatever level of commitment that you are calling your spiritual community. That's why I'm calling the gatherings a cafe. Everybody's okay with walking into a cafe. People who will not walk into a church or a synagogue or a mosque or a temple will walk into a cafe, okay? And we have to be welcoming to all, including people who are going to ring your bells like a set of chimes, okay? And your ability to move beyond that, to move beyond where your chimes are being rung, and move into a whole other way of welcoming someone without saying, I'm going to welcome you in order to change you, but I'm going to welcome you for just who and what you are, okay? If we had another 2 or 3 hours, I could talk about the work that I do with very basic white males, okay? And helping them to see themselves differently. I say I'm in this really weird place as a Black person doing self-esteem work with white males, okay? And a lot of the negative behavior that we're seeing that they are exhibiting outwards to people of color, women, whatever, okay, they do to themselves first. So they think it's okay because they're constantly getting this kind of behavior, okay? And so, hang on for a second. Okay, So I'm just checking to see if anyone else is raising their hand. Robin, are you raising your hand? Okay, so I'll get to you in a second. So so this notion of protecting myself. If I'm protecting myself, I wind up creating an entity that will have some, there'll be dozens or hundreds, or in some, I think that if I wanted to turn Commonwealth into a religion, there'd be thousands of people that would flock to it. And I get to wear, like really cool clothes and a pointy hat. And I don't think I'm going to stop at the red shoes. I'm not going that far. Okay. So, but the real test is to meet them where they are. And the real test is for me to be compassionate where they are, and to be able to root out the negative behavior from this from a sea of history and culture, some of it being really cool and some of it being really uncool. The person who's done that the best that I've seen in the world is F.W. de Klerk. He is unapologetically Afrikaner. He said, I'm an Afrikaner. I'm proud of being an Afrikaner. I am not proud of all of the things that Afrikaners have done. Yeah. And he can be very specific about the kinds of injury and the kinds of limited thought that goes into being an Afrikaner. But he says, you don't throw out, yes, he's not even a baby, it's a pretty mature person out with the bathwater, okay? And that's what we need in this society. So all the people I see that show up at Trump rallies, I'd love to have them in a room for about, it doesn't take me more than 2 or 3 hours, and they get to see the world a different way. And if we had enough time, I'd give you some examples of that. But I think that's, so the practice of inclusivity for your spiritual group means practicing inclusivity. Okay, it's really that simple. Okay, I may come back to that point, but I want to honor Robin, who's been waiting patiently, and I am going to remute you, and I'm going to unmute Robin. And where are you? And what's on your mind tonight?
Right, I'm in Baldwin City, Kansas, right in the
Okay.
middle of the country.
Yep.
I have a
And
center.
in the middle of the country in lots of different ways.
Oh, yeah. I have a little center here called the Light Center, and been living some alternative ways of thinking for a long, long time. I've had my center for 25 years. Mm-hmm. But I've also been going back and forth to South Africa for about 15 years, doing some work there. And
where in South Africa?
Go outside of Cape Town to a small town.
Okay.
And what's emerged out of that over all these years is this deep, deep feeling of connection with the original people who apparently trained their shamans in these hills in the little town that I visit. And I felt that something was calling me there. Something's calling. Well, how did I get from this little place in Kansas to this little place in the middle of South Africa? So long story short is that I feel as if the indigenous people who lived successfully, sustainably on this planet have an essence in their belief system that we can connect to, because they are the ones who knew how to live sustainably. And we can't go back. There's billions of us here now. We can't go back to living that model and be hunter-gatherers. We have technology, we have grocery stores, we have all this stuff now in this way of living, but we can learn Ubuntu, which is that original essence of understanding that we can only live successfully if we're part of a community. That if my greatest endeavor in my life is to help all of us achieve our life's purpose, you know, it's an amazing way of thinking, and it's part and parcel of the original people's way of being. They had to live that way in order to survive on the planet. And now we're beginning to get it that we have to live that way too in order to survive on the planet, and in order for the planet to survive anywhere close to what we understand it to be. Mm-hmm. So while I don't advocate that we become hunter-gatherers and go back to this, quote, primitive way of living, I have an immense respect for that cultural way of being and understanding. I could talk all night about this, so I'll stop.
Well, you and I may need to get on a phone line and talk all night about it then.
Okay.
So, well, another night. I'm getting a little tired here.
Yeah.
But what you're talking about is something that is crucially and vitally important. I am right now resisting jumping up and down in my seat because it makes the camera wobble, okay? But that's how important that this is. Yeah. It's interesting that this is the third day in a row it's come up, and I keep saying it's calling me to talk about this in this kind of a format, like in a whole time, and I haven't done it yet. So let me give you a few little snippets, and then we'll schedule a time to talk about it.
Okay.
What you're saying is vitally important. There are, so if you've read, have you read Creating I'm pointing to, well,
yeah, a long time ago.
Okay, get it out and read it again. Okay, read it every day. Right. So I talk about 3 levels of consciousness: keepers, breakers, and menders. The keepers are the indigenous people. The breakers are the people who break all of those relationships, all of the relationships. And the menders are those of us who are going to create a society based on the wisdom of the keepers. Okay. Now, what I mean by that is this. I grew up in a breaker education, and the breaker education has a way of looking at the world. Let's call it the standard model, okay? And the standard model says that time is linear, and it goes from human beings being these brutish, primitive, ape-like creatures that kind of ran around chasing down their food, and we eventually superseded that. So we evolved past that, so that hey, we now have cell phones, you know, and they don't. You know, they're still running around with spears, which means that they're primitive. That is a way of looking at the world. It's a religious belief. It's the religion of breakerism, and it's wrong.
Right.
Wrong. So
gotcha.
So what happened, and it happened somewhere around 12,000 years ago, and we don't know why it happened, but humanity basically split into 2 different forms of consciousness. Somewhere around 12,000 years ago, before that, all human beings thought of themselves as one with each other, one with nature, and one with the entire planet, or with the gods, etc. So this notion of we are one was something that we lived with for 1 million years. Somewhere around 12,000 years ago, this other branch happened where human beings started thinking and acting as though they were individuals, not a part of the community, not a part of the other beings, not a part of the earth. And we began to act as though that. So part of the standard model is, well, we evolved that because we're not primitive anymore. There's a guy, and I'll send this. I'll put this in the video. I don't know his name right now, but it's a TED talk by a guy by the name of Plotkin, and he talks about, and he's an ethnobotanist, and he goes into the Amazon where there are these healers that will tell them how to heal everything, anything. Okay. Now, how can a person who can give you the cure for cancer be considered primitive?
Right.
Okay. How can a person who says, oh, whatever your malady is, we'll fix it over here. I was just talking to a friend about something that happened to me in Sri Lanka. And this gets to the part about supermarkets. And we'll talk about supermarkets right now. So I was in Sri Lanka, pulled a ligament in my hip, and was in excruciating pain. Could barely move, and I lived in a second floor apartment, and I couldn't get up the stairs. It was just a mess. Went to the doctor, and the doctor was talking about operating. It's like, yeah, we'll cut it up, we'll sew it up, and you'll sit there for several weeks while it knits together, or we'll just give you a whole new hip. I wasn't doing that, so I went to a village doctor. The village doctor also happened to be a Buddhist monk. And I'm serious, his diagnosis was walk across the floor, now walk back, now walk over again. Okay, take these herbs. And within 24 hours, not only was my hip not hurting, I couldn't remember what the pain felt like. I couldn't remember. Was it sharp? Was it? It's like it just obliterated it. Okay. Now, the fee that he charged was put some money in that box that's nailed to that tree out there. Okay. And all the money I had on me was about $8. So I put $8 in the box, and he cured my hip. Now, the thing that's interesting is while he's doing that, I was doing this diagnosis, and of course it's got to be translated because I don't know Sinhalese. He takes a cell phone call. Okay, so he's not sitting under a tree in a loincloth. I mean, he's got a cell phone. There's a car waiting outside. You can live in this world, and you can also live in the other world. And that is our ultimate goal. That is exactly where we need to be. If I am looking at either one of these worlds as deficient, if I'm looking at either one of these worlds as primitive, as something for us to transcend, then I am going to miss it. Now, should we all become hunter-gatherers? No, because it's ecologically unsound to do that unless you are in these really small, isolated communities in the middle of a very big forest. Okay. Should we take the values that they have? Okay. I'm thinking specifically about the Native Americans here along the Columbia River, where in their traditional role, they would gather salmon for the entire tribe inside of 2 weeks. They were doing dip net fishing, and the men were dipping the nets and bringing them up, and the women were cleaning and drying it. They could clean and dry so many pounds of fish. They would leave the Columbia and not come back for a year. Okay. Now, that kind of living is possible as long as you're not damming the Columbia River and killing all the fish. That kind of living is still possible when you have enough respect to recognize that what they were doing to the fish meant there was more and more and more fish every year. What we do to the fish means there's less and less and less. Obviously, we breakers do less and less and less every year. People in Africa, people in South America, people in the rural parts of Asia, even some of the rural parts of Europe. I met some amazing indigenous people in Russia. Okay, a half hour north of St. Petersburg, Russia, and people were living in reindeer tents. You know, white skin, blue eyes, and they are as indigenous as anyone else. Okay, and so this is something that we need. We need to understand. It's something that we need to be very, very careful that we are including indigenous people and not just using them. Even the guy, when I send you this TED Talk, even the guy who was, you could tell how passionate he was that we have to stop slaughtering the indigenous population in the Amazon. Even he didn't get how important it was to start thinking like that, to start actually changing the way I'm thinking so that I can become one with them. Okay, that was just a few minutes of my few hours of conversation around this. And so I may wind up talking about this in the I may do another webinar next month around all this. I'll let you know.
Great.
So, any other thoughts? And I guess you'll have to put something in the chat so I can unmute you. I am. Let me see my time here. Oh, I said half an hour, or a little over half an hour. So I guess it's time to say goodbye. And I am going to switch back to this view. This has been really good for me. Your questions have been really good for me. It's going to help me to hone in my thoughts. I am writing a book right now that is going to connect the Dalai Lama's languaging around the spiritual revolution with mine, and bringing in this native indigenous point of view. And so stay tuned. I'm going to do, again, I'm really feeling, I'll be leaning toward the work with original peoples. So stay tuned. And I want to get I'm writing as fast as I can here, but I want to get out into the world the work around the Imaginal Cafe, so that we can start creating these, especially, I think that Centers for Spiritual Living, Unity, I'm doing some work with the Unitarian Universalists, I think are all primed to being seeds for this thing, and as it spreads out in the world. It's our work. All of us are doing our work, and I really am hoping and seeing this work taking legs and really moving forward. So thank you for attending tonight, and also thank you for the people who are going to be watching this on video. And I feel very full. And on that note, I wish us all well, and I will talk to you another time. Thank you.